Ready when you are.
Hey everyone, and welcome to this live broadcast. We're covering the latest revelations on the CIA's plans to kidnap and even kill. They've talked about killing, although they claim that they never were going to seriously carry it out. But they had plans that they discussed for assassinating WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange. And many of the information, many of these broad stroke and details in this report from Yahoo News. We've had bits and pieces, we've had things that we could suspect, but this gives us a lot of specifics and we're able to dig into it. And joining me is former CIA officer and whistleblower John Kiriakou, a good friend and colleague, and I'm glad to have him on to dig through this latest report. Thanks, John.
Thanks for inviting me, Kevin.
And thank you for taking the time. It's supposed to be a relaxing Sunday afternoon, but I suppose when you've got something like this that shows and is captivating people's attention. I mean, I noticed that it was trending on Twitter this morning that and Julian Assange for reasons that are actually worth seeing his name trend. He doesn't usually trend. Let me put up the article just so people can see clearly what we are talking about. And I'll let you, while I do this, I'll let you get into this broad story of like what we're seeing. Essentially, the main thrust of this is that we no longer have to talk vaguely about who the people are in U.S. intelligence that were behind Undercover Global, this private security company that was involved in the espionage operation that's been clearly documented by El País in Spain. We don't have to say anything vague anymore. We know it goes up to the highest levels of the CIA. That CIA director, Mike Pompeo, was obsessed. That's the word they use in the report. Obsessed with WikiLeaks and Julian Assange, and decided that, to use a euphemism that's famous from your time in the CIA, and I'll make clear before we get into this that all of this comes after your time at the CIA. All of this comes after your tenure. So nothing you are saying has any relationship to anything you would have had access to. This is all well after that.
That's right.
But Mike Pompeo was obsessed with Julian Assange, and to use a euphemism from your time, the gloves came off when it came to going after Julian Assange. And they talk about targeting WikiLeaks for disruption. So go ahead and give your reaction.
I woke up this morning to a half a dozen different friends having emailed me this article, and there were accompanying expressions of shock. That's the only word I can really think of to use here is shock. Mike Isikoff is a Pulitzer Prize winning investigative journalist. He's worked at the biggest, most important, best funded news outlets in America. The guy's a serious journalist. And, for Mike Isikoff to say something as definitive as the CIA was trying to murder Julian Assange or to capture Julian Assange, and then to go into detail of exactly how they were planning to do that, you have to take that very seriously. He interviews more than 30 current and former CIA officers and former administration officials who were privy to this information. It's so well sourced, 99% of it. It's so well covered that I have to believe it. We know that the CIA was obsessed, that Pompeo specifically was obsessed with Julian Assange and WikiLeaks because of the Vault 7 revelations. That was akin to the crown jewels of the mid 1970s being released. And by God, Pompeo and Gina Haspel were determined to put an end to Julian Assange and to put an end to WikiLeaks. So it wasn't just these insane plans to murder Assange, but there were accompanying plans to infiltrate and to neutralize WikiLeaks as an organization. And Isikoff says in the article that the CIA had some success in infiltrating WikiLeaks, in collecting information from inside the organization in determining WikiLeaks' future plans and intentions. They really targeted WikiLeaks directly and went after WikiLeaks. So this whole thing bothers me. There were a couple of revelations in this piece, Kevin, that were very, very disturbing to me, to the point where, like, I'm having trouble wrapping my brain around it. For example, they talked about the possibility of having to engage in a shootout in the streets of London outside the Ecuadorian embassy. They talked about the possibility of shooting the tires out of a Russian diplomatic plane so it couldn't lift off from an airport outside London if Julian Assange had been on the plane. Okay, these are acts of war. You can't do things like this. And then, almost as an aside, Isikoff says, the British agreed that they would be the ones doing the shooting. Well, that doesn't make it any less of an act of war. If Julian Assange had been released, for example, and if he had been granted asylum in Russia, and if the Russians had sent a plane to pick him up, that is a diplomatic vehicle, right? It has all the same diplomatic protections that an embassy would, or an embassy car would. You can't shoot the tires out. That is like firing a rocket at the Russian mainland. You just can't do things like that. But apparently, Mike Pompeo was so obsessed with taking down Julian Assange that that's exactly what they were planning to do.
Yeah, and so let's get into some of the things that should disturb and trouble people. I think first, since I have you, and you go all the way back to the infamous so-called enhanced interrogation techniques and everything, I picked up on a dynamic within the report that doesn't really get communicated by Isikoff and the other two reporters who worked on this story, but I think it needs to be put forward. It's that there is so little accountability, that there is so much impunity for what the CIA can do, that they're able to engineer carve-outs within the law, specifically that they know will give them cover so that they can commence these offensive operations against Julian Assange. And I believe, I think you probably agree with me, that the only reason that they can get away with this is because they know that nobody is going to give their names to the Justice Department for prosecution. And also because it seems like the Justice Department signaled to the CIA that as long as you create some kind of veneer of legality to what you're doing, it's open season.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We should have learned a lesson as a nation from the so-called enhanced interrogation techniques. You know, torture has been illegal in this country since 1946. We executed Japanese POWs for waterboarding American. We executed Japanese soldiers for waterboarding American POWs. It was an executable offense. It was a death penalty offense, and the law never changed. But we changed, and we didn't, as a country, learn a lesson from those carve-outs that you're talking about. Lawyers can make the law stand on its head or turn on its ear and make the law do whatever they want. And I think that's what we're seeing in this case. You raised something very important. The Trump administration had contempt for Congress, just abject contempt. Now, there is a way at the CIA that you go about doing something like this. First of all, you have to declare a person a clear and present danger to the United States. It appears that that's what they did with Julian. They said he is a clear and present danger to the safety and security of the United States, and as such, he has to be executed. But he's an Australian national. It's not like he's, from Tunisia or Burma or something. He's an Australian national, and Australia is one of the Five Eyes countries. And so the United States would have had to bring the Australians in on the operation. They would have had to have Australian permission to go ahead and murder an Australian national. Now, I can tell you how difficult that is, because when I was stationed in Pakistan, heading counterterrorism operations there, we caught an Australian national in Karachi. And he was a bona fide terrorist. He had converted to Islam. He had professed fealty to Osama bin Laden and Al Qaeda. And still, it was hands off because he was Australian. And in the end, we had to turn him over to Australia. Well, we didn't read anything of the sort in Issakov's article. There's no paragraph saying the Australian said, now, Pompeo, wait a minute. He's an Australian national, and while we don't like him either, you can't kill an Australian national. We didn't see any of that. So what are we supposed to conclude? That the U.S. did not inform Australia, or that the Australians were in on it? Now, it says in the article that the British certainly were in on it, that the British were the ones who agreed to shoot out the Russian planes or to carry out the gun battle that would have taken place in front of the Ecuadorian embassy. Does that mean Australia has changed too? And the Australians were willing to allow the British and the Americans to conspire to murder one of their nationals? It's chilling, but that's kind of the way it looks. So, number one, you've got to get permission from the Justice Department's Office of Legal Counsel. It appears that they got that. Number two, you would have to get the agreement of the Australian government. It appears that they got that too. Number three, and this is one that sort of makes me want to swallow my tongue, you have to get the approval of the congressional oversight committees. Now, if they were serious about this operation and the planning for the operation went as far as it did, that means that they got the permission of the oversight committees. I complain a lot in a lot of interviews that the oversight committees are little more than cheerleaders for the CIA. And they've been little more than cheerleaders for the CIA since the 1990s. But this is ridiculous. This is murder. Murder of an Australian national. Murder of somebody who has never been convicted in a U.S. court of committing any crime. In fact, the British courts deemed the accusation of his crime as not even worthy of extradition. So, the revelations in this article, if they're even half true, and like I say, he interviewed something like 30 former CIA people and administration officials, we have to believe him. I mean, this is just over the top.
Yeah. So just to get to this specific carve out, because I think people really need to hear this language, and it made the hair stand up on me because it just seemed so conniving. So you're talking about how this would work. The immediate question facing Pompeo and the CIA was how to hit back against WikiLeaks and Assange. Agency officials found the answer in a legal sleight of hand. Usually, for U.S. intelligence to secretly interfere with the activities of any foreign actor, the president must sign a document called a finding that authorizes such covert action, which must also be briefed to the House and Senate. What you're saying, they're intelligence committees. In very sensitive cases, it could be limited to the Gang of Eight, the four leaders of the House and Senate, plus the chairperson and ranking member of the two committees. But there's an important carve-out, and here's where Issakov's saying they may not need to tell the committees. Many of the same actions, if taken against another spy service, are considered, quote, offensive counterintelligence, end quote, activities, which the CIA is allowed to conduct without getting a presidential finding or having to brief Congress, according to several former intelligence officials. Often the CIA makes these decisions internally based on interpretations of so-called, quote, common law, yada, yada. And then it's basically saying that they can make up their own law that they will follow. And so basically, this goes back to something that sent red flags really high in the sky for me when I saw Mike Pompeo calling WikiLeaks a non-state hostile intelligence service.
That's right.
And I think we knew that this was a signal, but we didn't quite know the scope of what it was signaling. We didn't, and what you find in the article is that they actually deliberately decided that they would call WikiLeaks a hostile entity because they did not have proof, and this is important for all the people out there who are Democrats. The CIA had no proof that WikiLeaks was working for Russia. So they could not use authorities based on that. So they said, if we call it a hostile entity, then we can target it for disruption.
Yes. Yes. You know, it's funny. So many members of the media either underestimated the meaning of Pompeo's statement that WikiLeaks was a non-state hostile intelligence service, or just didn't understand what it meant. That was certainly a signal. That was a signal that the CIA was going to treat WikiLeaks like it might treat the Iranian intelligence ministry or the North Korean intelligence service, that there were no holds barred. They were going to spend resources, they were going to commit manpower, and they were going to take down WikiLeaks. Now we know that that also meant killing Julian Assange. So, you know, when somebody comes out with something like that, when a CIA director, a sitting CIA director in that case, comes out with something that's just so out of the ordinary, it's not by accident. It's not because he let something slip at a cocktail party. It's all very well planned. And now we realize, 4 years after the fact, 3.5 years after the fact, exactly what was meant by that statement.
Mm-hmm. And then let's get to what we're talking about. When we say targeted for disruption, what kind of things are they talking about doing? They lay this out. Isikoff and the other reporters lay out that this included paralyzing digital infrastructure. That would be one thing they could do. They could disrupt the communications of WikiLeaks. They could provoke internal disputes within the organization by planting damaging information, and steal WikiLeaks members' electronic devices if they wanted. So that's some of the things we find. The article details things like, well, first off, they say they figure that they could make people turn on each other because there's a lot of people who were privately talking about how they hated each other. But that's the truth for like any organization.
Sure.
You're always going to find organizations that have those kinds of divisions. So I wouldn't say that that's unique to WikiLeaks. There's a lot of factionalism everywhere. But then there's one person, I'm going to butcher his last name, who's mentioned in the article, but he's German, and his name is Andy Muller-Magoon. I'm probably not saying that correctly because you're supposed to have more of like an umlaut on his name, but he is a German citizen, and he's involved in the Chaos Computer Club. And there's a former official in there who admits that some actions were taken against him in involving targeting his devices. And it looks like there's even a potential that someone burglarized his home.
Right. Which actually would be quite a common operation. One of the things that the CIA likes to do is these disruption operations. They're fun to plan. CIA officers enjoy messing with people, like really messing with them. And you break into their homes, you plant bugs, you plant cameras, you rent the apartment upstairs or downstairs and drill a hole that the human eye can't even detect, and put a fiber optic camera in the hole. You rent an apartment across the street and you beam microwaves to detect vibrations on the window, which you can then listen to and hear conversations. There are a million things you can do, especially when you have an unlimited budget and the cooperation of the host intelligence service. So, you know, if I were WikiLeaks, I'd say, listen, there's literally nothing that you can do to make sure that you're 100% safe. There are a lot of things that you can do to make the CIA's job more difficult, but you're going to have to eventually leave your apartment to buy groceries or go to work or go to the doctor or whatever, and that's when they're going to break into your place. In addition, as Isikoff points out, the CIA went about stealing cell phones, hacking into computers, doing all different kinds of things that are quite easy to do. And Isikoff entered one WikiLeaks person who said that he believed that his encrypted phone was being tapped. You know, encryption's going to slow them down a little bit, but they're going to be able to hack it. And if they can't do it in-house, they'll outsource it. We know that the FBI did that a couple of years ago when they had a terrorist's cell phone that they couldn't hack, so they turned it over to an Israeli hacking company, and the Israelis did it. So, disruption is the easy part. Collection against WikiLeaks is the easy part. I'm stuck on this murder plot. This is just so... if I were still at the CIA, if this were 2004, and somebody said, "Oh, listen, we're gonna plan to murder this Australian national because he keeps publishing our stuff and we don't like his politics," that would have been like a bad joke. I mean, I don't even know anybody in 2004 who would have said words like that out loud. It's just so outrageous. And now, we read it and we say, wow, CIA, they were pretty mad, but this is what they do. They have to go after WikiLeaks. No, that just gives you an idea of how insane Mike Pompeo and Gina Haspel were, how insane Donald Trump was. And let me add one other thing. Isikoff says in the article that this went up to the highest levels of American government. Well, that's journalistic code for the president of the United States. Yeah. It's not that Pompeo and Haspel were having coffee in his office saying, "Hey, we should do this." They went up to the president to get a finding. You can't do anything without a finding. You can't. When the CIA went to get the finding for torture, what they did first is they came up with the torture program. Then they went to the Office of the OLC, the Office of Legal Counsel at Justice, and the CIA General Counsel argued why torture should be legal, and OLC signed off on it. Then it went to the National Security Advisor, and they made their argument. And then the National Security Advisor signed off on it. And then it went to the president to sign a finding. Well, that's what happened here.
So, I agree with you. And the fact that they were talking about killing him, but then also seriously considering a rendition operation against an editor, a publisher of a media organization.
This is insane. Shooting out the tires of a Russian diplomatic flight that would have, taken him into exile in Russia. You can't do that. You might as well shoot the plane down out of the sky. It's an act of war. You can't do it. We see these cute little scenes on Law and Order where they trick this Iranian diplomatic car into opening its doors and they grab the guy out of the diplomatic car. That doesn't happen in real life. You can't do that, because then what's going to happen if the Russians decide to shoot out the tires of an American diplomatic plane, or to violate American diplomatic sovereignty, maybe go into a classified diplomatic pouch? You can't do things like that. So the fact that it went all the way to the president, wow, I don't even have words.
So I'd like to get your response to another part of this that is really alarming, and that's the part where they talk about, and this is under Barack Obama actually, redefining WikiLeaks and high-profile journalists as information brokers.
Yes.
And apparently, if you treat a journalist like an information broker, then they no longer have constitutional rights or press freedom. So then you can target them. I haven't looked closely at the law, but again, this goes back to how we started our conversation. Right. Engineering and making up some kind of it's basically the way we've been doing government since the September 11th attacks. You get somebody to draft you an OLC opinion or a legal memo, and then it says that you can do whatever you would like to do.
This is so chilling. You have recounted this in such a calm way that it belies the danger of even discussing the government even discussing a policy like this. What this would effectively do is make any journalist who reports on national security issues that the government doesn't like or that the government doesn't want released liable for prosecution on espionage charges. We should also remember that in many cases, espionage carries with it the death penalty in this country. Okay? Mm-hmm. So if Kevin Gosztola, who's an investigative journalist, has a source who tells him something that's sensitive and important, and maybe it's in the public interest, that the American people know what their government is doing in their name. If the person who happens to be sitting in the White House doesn't like that, under this rule, he could charge you with espionage. Now, even your trial then wouldn't be public. I mean, you have a constitutional right to face a jury of your peers. You have a constitutional right to a fair and open trial, but not with an espionage charge. They would declare, they would implement what's called the CIPA Act, the Classified Information Protection Act. They would seal off the courtroom. You would be tried in secret. If they deemed you to be a threat to the national security, you could even be taken to a military prison, to a brig, to Guantanamo. I mean, the possibilities are endless here. That's what makes this so crazy. And another thing that we need to remind each other of is this is not specific to Donald Trump. This isn't because Donald Trump is nuts and he came up with this. This started with Barack Obama. There were elements of it, actually, that started with George W. Bush. So this is a bipartisan assault on our constitutional rights here, especially our rights to a free press.
And I don't know where you'll come down on this, but I personally think that we need to fight for some rights of editors and media organizations to protect sources, to engage in source protection, because they have said that, and a lot of people have ceded this point, they've said that so much of what the Obama administration wanted to do or the Trump administration wanted to do became justifiable because WikiLeaks helped Edward Snowden get to safety. And I don't think I agree with that. I believe that that should still be within the boundaries of what's expected of a media institution, that if you're going to practice journalism, you need to protect your sources from being harmed. If they're going to make sacrifices and give you the information, now granted, WikiLeaks was not the location in which those materials were disclosed. They were given to Glenn Greenwald, Laura Poitras, who, by the way, are the high-profile journalists we were talking about that they wanted to define as information brokers. But, what I'm trying to say here is that WikiLeaks should not be criminalized because they were willing to protect a source. I don't think that we should live in a world where the actions you take to try and protect sources are things that open you up to a criminal case.
Oh, amen. And again, this goes back, multiple presidential administrations. There was a situation where the Environmental Protection Agency SWAT team, and yes, there is an EPA SWAT team, raided an employee's house in suburban Maryland. This guy just happened to be married to a journalist for the Washington Times, which is a conservative paper. She's a national security journalist. And when they went into the house to search for evidence about whatever crime he was accused of committing, they went into the den, which she used for her journalism, and they took her notebooks, which included all of her source information. Well, she had to go to the federal courts just to get her notebooks back. The government wants that to be like a norm. They want to be able to ask you, who are your sources for XYZ story, and to have you compelled by law to tell them who your sources are. There's been very little pushback in the courts so far, very little pushback. And you're right, the tip of the spear on this issue is WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks tried to protect Ed Snowden as best they could. That's not a crime. To me, that's just the Constitution in action.
Yeah. And the idea that they could treat, basically what they're trying to do is say that the way they go after arms smugglers or arms traffickers, like they're going to call me an information trafficker. Like basically that, like if I got these documents and I was trying to find somewhere that I could share them so that the public could know what their government was doing, that I could be accused of information trafficking. Basically, like that's the logic that is being laid out here by our intelligence agencies. And so another issue we need to get to, and I'll say we're going to wrap in the next 10 to 15 minutes, or try to, because I want to be respectful of John's time, it being a Sunday afternoon. There'll be plenty more opportunities in the coming weeks to dig back into things we didn't get to today. But if you got any quick questions you want to throw in, let us know. We'll be happy to address them. But we've got this lawyer who is part of the National Security Council. His name's John Eisenberg. And he says, apparently to Isikoff, I think he's a source or someone, sorry, I don't think he's a source, but someone who knew what he was doing, shared these details, it looks like, and told Isikoff that this top lawyer for the National Security Council was very afraid of what would happen, supposedly, if the CIA kidnapped or tried to kill Assange. And he should be. I think that should be the appropriate reaction. Right? We want people who are officials to be afraid of what could happen. But decided that if the Justice Department could just go ahead and draft some charges and indict Julian Assange and get that process going, then that would be the way to remedy this whole matter, because now the Justice Department would be able to take control and the CIA wouldn't be able to kill Julian Assange anymore.
How backward is that? That, well, if we indict Julian Assange on these national security crimes that may land him in prison for the rest of his life, that'll be like a favor to him, because then once he's in the system, the CIA can't murder him in cold blood wherever he happens to find himself. That's the situation we've gotten ourselves in. And I can't help but to blame Barack Obama for letting this go as far down the drain. Our rights go as far down the drain as they've gone. We were bound to eventually have a president like Donald Trump who was so deranged that the Constitution didn't have a chance under him. So it should have been up to presidents like Obama and Bush that were supposed to be mainstream, that were supposed to be protecting the Constitution, to protect us from the likes of Donald Trump. And instead, they were all on the same side on this issue. They were all anti-WikiLeaks. They all wanted to crucify Julian Assange. Now we have this information that there were these plans to murder him in a shootout on the streets of London, and nobody's really saying anything. It was interesting to me that there were so many people, former, perhaps current CIA and NSC employees that Isikoff talked to. He didn't say anything in this article about talking to anybody on Capitol Hill. He also didn't say anything about talking to anybody at the Justice Department. Now, I remember during the torture program, before I blew the whistle, there were dozens of people at the CIA who were speaking out internally saying, this is wrong, we shouldn't be doing it, I don't want to be involved, I don't want my name associated with this. And they were willing to really give up their careers so as not to be associated with the torture program. It looks like something similar was happening on this at the CIA, but not at the Justice Department, not at the White House, and either nobody cared on Capitol Hill or nobody was ever informed on Capitol Hill. I'd like to get to the bottom of that.
Well, yeah, so you had Attorney General Jeff Sessions, who really wants to bring a case against Julian Assange.
Very much.
And I mean, from your time on Capitol Hill just how much he made it a part of his identity to hate the press and hate leaks in general. I mean, he's probably one of the most strident zealots when it comes to anti-leaks provisions. I mean, he and Dianne Feinstein probably got along pretty well because they could see eye to eye on any measure that could be proposed to give the power to government agencies to go after leakers.
Yes.
But let me ask you, so what's your view? There's over 30 people here from the National Security Council and these other places, and possibly within the CIA, who had some involvement, or they were in these meetings. Maybe they were administration officials in the Trump White House, who knows? And they're speaking to everyone anonymously. Don't you think that as far along as this all is, they might have some obligation really and truly to come forward and reveal who they are and take a stand and say something to stop this? Like right now, like they're not going to be in jeopardy. There's nobody that is going to tell them, you can't put your foot down and say it is wrong to murder and kill a publisher.
Let me answer that by telling you a short story. In 2002, I was the note taker in a meeting at the White House with one of the CIA principals, right? So there were very important people in the room. The vice president, it was Dick Cheney at the time, the national security advisor, the secretary of state, the secretary of defense, very important people in the room. And each one of them brought a note taker along with them. So I was the CIA officer's note taker. At the end of the meeting, as the meeting broke up and most of the principals began leaving the room, one of the White House people said to my boss, "Can you hang on for a minute? I have a question to ask you." And I started walking out to give him privacy. And he said to me, "Wait, I want you to hear this." And he whispered to me, "I want a witness." Like he knew what was coming. And so this White House official said, "I need to talk to you about taking out a hit on somebody." And my boss immediately responded, "This conversation is illegal. I'm reporting it to the general counsel, and I'm not discussing it any further." And he turned to me and he said, "Let's get out of here." And we walked out. And I said, "I can't believe what I just heard." And he said, "We're going straight to the general counsel's office. We don't do things like that." And we did. We went straight to the general counsel's office and we reported it, and it was reported to the Justice Department as a potential crime. And of course, nothing ever happened. But now we're supposed to believe, well, I actually do believe the Mike Isikoff reporting, that these kinds of conversations take place now as a matter of course, that everybody, sits around a table to talk about how to murder Julian Assange and how to infiltrate and destroy WikiLeaks. And they probably all think that they're patriotic Americans and they're going to get a medal for their patriotism. Well, this isn't what the Constitution calls for. This isn't what the rule of law is. You can't just murder people because you don't like their politics. That's not real life. One of the shames of this, Kevin, is that I really believe this reporting is going to be vetted. I think that Isikoff's reporting here is true, and I think nothing is going to come of it. Nothing.
Yeah.
There won't be any prosecutions. Nobody's going to go to prison over this. Mike Pompeo is running for friggin' president of the United States right now.
Yeah.
And this is the guy who was supposed to be such a pious Christian.
Yeah. Well, it's almost as if sitting around a table with baseball cards with terrorism suspects' names on them and having Terror Tuesdays rubs off on you, and it becomes so easy. And you start by saying, "I'm just going to kill the terrorists." And then before you know it, you want to kill and assassinate people who you perceive to just be your political enemies. And
that's right.
Because they've had the process, hey, why not expand it to people who are hostile to the intelligence agencies? Why not? Why not? I mean, when's it going to stop? Nobody's going to stop us. Nobody's going to tell us we can't. Who's going to stop us? I mean, nobody's going to stop them. So where does it end? And I think that's the critical issue here. So I want to ask you about something that's at the end. And I have a huge problem with the way that it's presented by Michael Isikoff and Yahoo News, but I think it's still important to convey it the way that they did. So I'm just going to read. that it says that spy services are increasingly using a WikiLeaks model of posting stolen materials online. In 2018, the Trump administration granted the CIA aggressive new secret authorities to undertake the same sort of hack and dump operations for which Russian intelligence has used WikiLeaks. Among other actions, the agency has used its new powers to covertly release information online about a Russian company that worked with Moscow's spy apparatus. So I'd like to get your reaction to it. I think you know what I have a problem with, but I'll also add that I'll add the fact that they call the model that the CIA is doing hack and dump as extremely ignorant and a false representation of what WikiLeaks does. Yes, they have entire caches of files. Yes, they've been known to publish those entire caches of files and not go through all the materials. Yes, there has been some small amount of recklessness before, but for the most part, and when you look at their releases over the last 7 to 8 years, it's constantly with partnerships through media organizations who have gone through the data sets, who know what is in the files, and they are doing journalism on. It's not a hack and dump operation, no. and nor is WikiLeaks hacking these materials. So it's wrong to say. So actually, CIA has become the caricature of WikiLeaks that they dislike.
Yeah. That's right. I agree with all of your objections. I think you've hit the nail on the head here. And I'll add, too, that this is something that I think WikiLeaks needs to be very careful of. That's that the CIA doesn't create disinformation, make it look like real intelligence, and then send it into WikiLeaks as something that's been hacked. You know, WikiLeaks, not just WikiLeaks, but we see it at The Intercept and The Guardian. And there are news organizations that have their encryption codes on their websites, where if you have sensitive information, classified information, you can send it to them securely. Well, what's to keep the CIA from coming up with fake, Russian documents or Chinese or Cuban or Iranian or whatever, and then just dumping it? I use the word dump there on the part of the CIA, dumping it on WikiLeaks and saying, hey, here's some really great intelligence. You guys should run with it. And WikiLeaks then doesn't know where it came from. They don't realize, they don't have any way of realizing that it's CIA disinformation. That's something that frightens me.
Yeah, well, and they can also launder their own information. The
Sure,
CIA
they can.
could just say, this is stuff we went out. We're not going to put it out ourselves. So we'll just direct it to this organization. And then, of course, I see a couple of people pointing to, you're probably familiar with the organization Bellingcat, which is very highly suspect, I would say, in the things that they do. So we'll start wrapping. I want to play on our way out here. I have this file that this is from a Panorama documentary. It's just going to take me a moment to pull it up here, but this is Leon Panetta, who was the CIA director. I don't know if you had a chance to see this clip, but this was for a documentary that was done by public television in Germany. And it was called The USA versus Julian Assange. And this is Leon Panetta being asked about the UC Global operation, which we now know was sponsored by Mike Pompeo. And it's important for us to point out that that there is a criminal case in Spain investigating privacy offenses that were committed. But I'm just going to play this clip here. And this is what Mike Pompeo had to say.
Wir erzählen den ehemaligen CIA-Chef von den Aufnahmen in der Botschaft.
Doesn't surprise me. I mean, that kind of thing goes on all the time. In the intelligence business, the name of the game is to get information any way you can. And I'm sure that's what was involved here.
So he's laughing. He essentially laughs that they were engaged in these operations or whatever it was. It's funny to Leon Panetta that this is what the CIA was doing to Assange and WikiLeaks.
Yeah. They act like it's a joke. You know, when Mike Pompeo said almost flippantly, you know, we lie, we cheat, we steal, ha 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 ha, like it was a big joke. Yeah, that's exactly what they do. That's what they do for a living. That's how they get promoted, by lying, cheating, stealing, manipulating the media, manipulating governments, manipulating public opinion. He chuckles there, just like Pompeo chuckled before him and John Brennan chuckled before him. But they're deadly serious about it. This is what they do.
Yeah. And there's one small thing that I think a connection needs to be made. We'll talk about the person who's actually in jail right now, who should be set free immediately right now. If there was a just world, which we do not live in one, but if there was a just world, this would be right now, you know, Joe Biden would drop the charges or make a phone call to Merrick Garland, and the White House would have Merrick Garland in the Justice Department, or Merrick Garland himself could read Yahoo News and make the decision on his own that this needs to be ended and the charges need to be dropped. But there's something pointed out in this article that says that Britain agreed to keep the bail jumping charge against Julian Assange after the sexual allegations were dropped by the Swedish government, and did so that the Justice Department would have time to put together charges against Julian Assange. And that bail jumping charge is something that goes under the radar quite a bit, but people need to understand that is what's keeping him in jail, and that is the only reason why he is not free right now during the appeal.
And he's already served something like double the maximum sentence for the bail jumping charge.
But the bail jumping John became this thing that convinced the judges. It convinced the judges that he would flee justice.
Yes, right.
So the fact that he has this on his record is making it impossible for him to get out of jail.
It's true.
So it's infuriating. And so, anyways, we have got the hearing coming up on October 27th. It's the next part of the appeal. Mm-hmm. You know, I haven't had a chance to talk to you. We need to conclude, but I can't help but bring in the fact that the FBI has the informant Ziggy Todarson, who I know you've read about. So we need to put all of everything together. You've got the CIA plotting assassination operations against Julian Assange, trying to poison Julian Assange. And meanwhile, you've got the FBI working an informant who is a pedophile.
Convicted pedophile. Yes.
No, he was the reason why someone committed suicide. You read that right? You read that correctly? He caused a boy to commit suicide. And if you've listened to the audio, we've got it up on our Shadowproof channel. You can go listen. I dug through the audio clips that Stunden's reporter, Bjartmar Anderson, did. He got real deep into the nasty, sludgy slime and talked to this guy for 9 hours. And man. Yeah. It made me long for the days of Adrian Lamo. He made me long for the days of Adrian Lamo trying to milk Chelsea Manning over the chats because, just to listen to him, he's asked about whether, basically he's asked if you know when no means no, that you're not supposed to, keep pushing these boys to have relations with you. And he's like, well, I was just hitting on them or something like that. It's insane. So when you add in the FBI's informant, and you add in what the CIA's conduct is in this, and then also I should mention the FBI stole Julian Assange's legally privileged materials. We know that he confiscated their ARC. All that together, there is no reason why this case should still be going.
No. Any criminal defense attorney of any repute at all should be able to pick this case apart in a day. The government's entire case is based on a convicted pedophile's lies. Now, for whatever reason, he confessed to an Icelandic journalist that he lied about his access to Julian Assange. He lied about his position in WikiLeaks. He embezzled money from WikiLeaks and then went on to molest young boys and was convicted of pedophilia. And that's their star witness.
Not to mention the conspiracy theory that they have for Julian Assange, quote unquote, hacking into the Pentagon systems through Chelsea Manning.
Ridiculous.
Makes no sense whatsoever. No. And actually,
never happened.
I just like to point out that the Supreme Court says that what Chelsea Manning did was not a crime. Have you followed that? Are you aware of this?
I missed that.
That they issued a decision on the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, and they said that exceeding authorized access means that you have to have not had access to those information, to those files. So Chelsea Manning had access to every single file. This is what her attorney, David Coombs, argued during the court-martial at Fort Meade. This is what they maintained all along, that she could not be guilty of computer crimes. Maybe it could have been the case that she, maybe you want to say she committed crimes in the disclosure of information, but she had access to those files. And the Supreme Court said, because there was a law enforcement guy, a police officer, I think, who was, he was entrapped, basically. It was a sting operation. He was asked to look up a license plate for something it was like for money, and he did it, and he ended up being prosecuted. But he had access to that information, so it wasn't a crime to pull up that license plate. And that's the deal, is that if you have access, you are not exceeding authorized access. It cannot be that you are hacking. So we've said all along that this is a conspiracy theory made up by the U.S. Justice Department about Julian Assange that has no basis at all. I mean, they talk about us all the time as like we're conspiracy theorists and we make up all kinds of stuff and we're spreading fake news. And like they're the ones that do this. This is what they do with our taxpayer dollars.
It's true. It's true. And it's no longer a crime to propagandize the American people. Since the end of the George W. Bush administration, there's been this change in U.S. law that the U.S. government is now permitted to propagandize the American people. And so, what do you believe? What's the origin of all this information?
John, thank you for joining me to
My
talk
pleasure.
about this. And if you have not read already, you really should. It's one of those rare examples of mainstream reporters actually putting out stuff. Now, I think there's a Russiagate narrative veneer to it that I'd be careful about. But ultimately, there are a lot of really important details that needed to be shared with the public. And Michael Isikoff and the other reporters did a fantastic job. So we'll make a point of reading it. Thank you all for tuning in. I'm just going to put up, John, you do stuff for Consortium News. So I think I want to make sure that everybody who has watched our stream today gets over to Consortium News and shows them some support. And
wonderful.
And then I'm going to put up the URL for my newsletter and encourage you all to subscribe and make sure you're there if you're looking for future updates on WikiLeaks and Julian Assange. That's where you can go to get them. With that said, thank you all and have a good rest of your day.
Bye, everybody.